Good afternoon, Central Florida. I'm happy to join you today to give you some real head spinning information that will make you think and make you perhaps make some changes in your life. I'm happy to be joined again by Camille. As you recall, Camille is a graduate of the University of Florida and just a brilliant young scientist in her own way. And I'm going to be bringing to you a subject matter that is very touchy, but it is called the cancer threat of beauty products. The cancer threat of beauty products, which reminds me of the book that I found a few years back called Drop Dead Gorgeous. Wow, she's drop dead gorgeous. And I know a lot of you ladies want to be drop dead gorgeous. Camille, would you agree with that there is a fascination with youth and having a certain kind of appearance?
Absolutely. I think everyone would be lying if they didn't admit that at some point they kind of have fallen prey to the pressures of beauty and societal pressures.
Yeah. All right. Well, this actually happens to be a capstone presentation that I had to do for the University of Florida. And it was at least 6 months to a year's worth of reading and trying to understand the complications of these cancer threats in beauty supplies. So, with that said, I'll say this: that in the quest for trying to look beautiful, a lot of women, particularly women of color, and women that have been marginalized, they have historically relied on skin lighteners, chemical hair relaxers, and straighteners. Yet, fairly recently, within the last couple of decades, research reveals that these seemingly innocuous products may contain hidden dangers that extend far beyond just aesthetic concerns and minor side effects. So, the research indicates that these products may contain hormone-like chemicals known as endocrine disrupting chemicals that could be contributing to an increased risk of reproductive system cancers such as breast, uterine, and possibly even ovarian cancers. And this came about by Chang, Chang, back in 2022. What do you think about what I've just said so far?
Did you say relaxers and skin lighteners?
I certainly did. Skin lighteners, chemical hair relaxers, and straighteners. And these are things that you can find at your nearest beauty supply place. We've got a place called Sally's here, I think Walmart, Dollar General, lots of places where you can pick up these items. And I'm suggesting that maybe they could be introducing some problems for our young women. And so this has become a fascination. Breast cancer remains the most commonly diagnosed cancer worldwide and is regarded as the second leading cause of cancer death in women in the United States. And there's a professor at Columbia named Lanos, Lanos. She confirmed this on a peer-reviewed research article in 2017. In the United States, cancer of the uterus is also a very common cancer of the female reproductive organs. So then that comes from the key statistics for endometrial cancer. So if we're talking about breast cancer, uterine cancer, or even ovarian cancer for that matter, we've struck a chord, and there's a lot of women that have these estrogen-dependent cancers.
I see. You seem especially passionate about this subject. I'm wondering what captured your interest in this to begin with.
Very good question. Well, I used to do something called thermography, which is a non-invasive way of actually looking at breast tissue. And lo and behold, I was able to find cases where there were lumps or tumors. They were not all malignant. They were often benign and, in fact, may have represented fibrocystic changes. But I've taken an interest in breast tissue, and the thermography was great because it did not expose women to any radiation. And that was a really important subject.
Mm-hmm.
A typical mammography will give you ionizing sorts of radiation. No amount of radiation is safe for you. But I should also tell you that under the age of 40, black women are developing breast cancer at a more rapid rate than any other demographic. And that really puzzled me. That, in addition to the fact that there is a 40% higher mortality among African American women when you compare them to the socially advantaged women. And so, as a result of those two statistics, I wanted to find out what in the world was happening in the world of African American women that could be responsible for the increase in mortality or increase of incidence of cancer among those that were under 40. In fact, I know of a few young ladies who developed problems under the age of 30. And so that something wasn't right about that. I knew it was not a genetic thing. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did.
Breast, uterine, and ovarian cancers are three prominent estrogen-dependent cancers. That means that they require some extra estrogen in order to get them to grow. And estrogen is a hormone that promotes growth. And that could be good growth, but typically it's either fibroids or some other kind of a tumorous information. But these endocrine disrupting chemicals, they cause hormonal imbalance. And this was documented by Henderson and Fagelson back in 2000. Now, estrogen is really an important hormone for reproductive health, and it causes young girls to develop secondary sex characteristics. Maybe it will cause breast buds to emerge, and the shape of a woman starts to change as a result of some of these estrogenic changes, which are all good. However, it's a double-edged sword because when the levels are disrupted, which can happen from using personal care products, and we're suggesting hair products such as straighteners and relaxers, even dyes have some import in this conversation. It can increase the risk for some bigger problems, and the biggest problem would be cancer. Notice that I didn't say that it causes cancer, but rather what I'm saying is that it increases the risk of developing cancer. What do you think?
Do we know if that's the same for children as adult women? The susceptibility of these hormone changing the endocrine system changes?
Good question. It has been documented that the earlier that menses begins, and that's the beginning of the menstrual cycle, the greater chance that you may have of developing cancer down the road. And the literature actually identifies children under 10, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that have developed pubic hair. And this caused their primary care doctor to send them to endocrinologists. And those endocrinologists insisted that the parents bring all the creams, lotions, and potions they were using for their little girls. Lo and behold, they contained ingredients that could elevate or disrupt hormones. And so children may fall into a word that you used was susceptibility, but a window of susceptibility. And so if girls started to have their hair relaxed at age 10 or 11 or 12, this is kind of like a double whammy because this is the time that they would normally have sexual changes in their bodies. And this would represent another window of susceptibility. Probably the pregnant woman. What do you think would happen if a pregnant woman is exposed to hormonal impacts? And what impact do you think that could have on her unborn child?
From what I'm learning, it seems that the child is at the mercy and might be taking the brunt of the issues.
Absolutely. So if you can imagine a little girl or a little boy, but let's say a fetus who requires that the processes of cell division and multiplication. This is what when sperm and egg meet and they form a unit. That unit begins to divide and to divide and to divide until it begins to form various organ systems. And those organ systems require fidelity. They don't need any interference. But if you throw in hormonal interference, why, you might cause the male to have lesser amounts of testosterone, and that could have an impact as he grows up, as he does not want to throw a football, he wants to throw a Barbie doll. And this would happen very innocuously. Mother's not thinking because she wants to look beautiful, and she's using products that may cause some interruption of that. Same with the little girl. So if they're used during pregnancy, if anything out of order is used during pregnancy, it could interfere with the perfection of the process of organogenesis, where these organs that need to be formed perfectly fine. And we used to think that the placenta was a protection for the baby, but we're now finding out that that is not true. In fact, we're finding out that at birth, on the first day of life, the average baby is born with over 250 chemicals in their
Wow.
bodies that they didn't get at McDonald's. They didn't get it at the Lowe's or the Home Depots or any other mechanic manufacturing shop. They got it from mommy. And that means that mommy is already toxic. According to the CDC, she already has lots of chemicals in her system that could produce some concern. But anyway, I kind of diverted, but I thought that was enough important information to
Absolutely.
share with you. So what we're finding is that these endocrine disrupting chemicals have been linked to these various forms of cancer, highlighting a troubling intersection of beauty products and health risks. So the evidence is now suggesting that these hair care products are not only associated with just disrupting hormones, but they heighten the chance for cancer. And this is particularly concerning for women of color because these product chemicals have actually been tested and found to be in higher amounts in minority communities. And this work was done by Dr. James Todd, and she's now an associate professor at Harvard University. She's been working on this kind of information for the last 20 years. And so it's not just hearsay. They've actually done some blood and perhaps urine analysis to discover that more of these chemicals are in the minority marginalized communities. Did you?
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And something that may be of interest to the public is that earlier in this year of 2024, the New York Times did a fascinating article about the disturbing truth about hair relaxers. And it pinpointed a lot of factual information of the concerns that scientists have begun to realize. So I'd like to recommend that you look up that article when time permits. It is The Disturbing Truth About Hair Relaxers, and it was Linda Villarosa who wrote that article, but something that you would absolutely appreciate because it tells a story, in fact, of women, young girls, whatever age, they use products that had lye, and the lye would cause horrible burning pain. And that burning pain was opening up membranes, allowing the harsher endocrine disrupting chemicals to get into the body, to move systemically. And I wonder if this could be also answering why in general, marginalized women have worse health outcomes to begin with?
I had a quick question. Do you think that not only it being on someone, but being around and the application of these certain processes, do you think the person inhaling these kind of um, chemicals, is that also a danger?
You know, you have just reminded me of something. I have two friends who have recently died within the last 5 years. Both of them, it was a husband and wife, and they were cosmetologists. They used a lot of hair products. They did not have any kind of ventilatory system within the office. I'm not sure that any of these beauty salons necessarily have any
Proper
ventilation
ventilation, yeah.
and suction. You know, these are things that are very prominently found in laboratories where they can suck away things that are untoward. Or I don't know that cosmetologists use masks as often, but they certainly should be wearing gloves because our skin is a very effective absorption
Mm.
territory, and the lungs also can pick up on things and they can be breathed into the system. And we used to have this suspicion that small amounts we didn't have to worry about. But I think that is a false notion because maybe we don't know how much of a toxic thing can we allow into our bodies
Right.
before it triggers a problem.
Right. It could be cumulative. We have no idea.
Exactly. So going forward, the paper that I decided to do on this capstone project was in the format of a narrative literature review. And I was trying to answer four important questions. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to cover all of these, but what are endocrine disrupting chemicals and why should public health think that this is a big concern? Why should public health officers or your doctors or your OBGYN doctors, why should they think that this is important? Number two, does the regular or frequent use of hair products and personal care products that contain endocrine disrupting chemicals increase the risk of reproductive system cancers, such as breast and uterine cancers? Third question, what actions can public health officials take to advocate for greater oversight and regulation of endocrine disrupting chemicals? And finally, the subject matter of environmental injustice of beauty. How does the intersection of race, gender, and class support health disparities? Wow. So I'd like to cover some of those issues. And so during the research process, it actually covered 30 to 40 years of association between chemical hair products and reproductive system cancers. And once again, focusing a lot on the marginalized populations because this, once again, is the population that may be pressured from a societal point of view to look a certain way. So African American women have probably been told that if you have straight hair, if your skin is lighter, you might get a better education, you may get a better job, you may somehow satisfy the fear factor that the larger socially advantaged communities might desire. What's your innate thought about the pressure that black women may adopt and may feel about changing their appearance? You know, there was a time there was a guy named James Brown, and he used to make music, and I'm black and I'm proud. Has something happened to that?
I'll speak from experience. I grew up in a mainly white schools, middle school and high school, and during this time, I also felt the pressure to have my hair straightened. I would do keratin treatments maybe once a year. And looking back, I think a lot of it had to do with trying to fit in and just trying to feel like I'm like everyone else. And in doing so, maybe not realizing putting my body at risk inadvertently, trying to fulfill some of these pressures.
I think that's a very honest answer, and I think it it is almost an unconscious, subconscious phenomena of feeling the need to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
We all want to fit in. We don't want to be pushed to a corner or thought less than. But I think it was Martin Luther King who talked about the real importance is the content of one's character as,
Mm-hmm.
as being the metric that we should be applying and not necessarily the appearance. And thank God that when you go to a botanical garden, not all the flowers don't all look alike. Isn't it wonderful that
Yeah, that's what makes them
that there's
special.
a great variety of beautiful plants?
Yeah, and
And
they're all equally beautiful,
they're
just
all
in their
equally,
own way.
yes, in their own way. So addressing these research questions that I just enumerated is crucial for understanding some broad implications of how these endocrine disrupting chemicals impact women's health, and especially where they may be aggressively marketed to consume these products. And in some instances, black skin is denigrated, and so there just seems to be a environmental, these are like the actual chemical kinds of things, and maybe where people live, what they have access to find to buy, and certain social determinants of health that could make life a little bit pressured. So first of all, I'm going to repeat that question. What are endocrine disrupting chemicals? I've used that term a few times. Sometimes I'll refer to it as EDCs, but they're hormones or they're chemicals that are in a lot of our everyday products. And in fact, I'm going to mention some of those products as we move forward. But you wouldn't know that they're inside adhesives, brake fluids, flame retardants. Flame retardants are in a lot of our furniture. We sit on couches that when they have these flame retardants, it's supposed to prevent a fire from causing them to go ablaze if your place caught on fire. But they're in airplane seats. We would hate to have a fire on an airplane and have those
Yeah.
seats burning. But they also include PVC pipes, that sort of plastic, the plastic food boxes
Mm.
that pizzas come in, pacifiers that babies are given,
Wow.
certain medicines, certainly cosmetics, hydraulic fuels, printing inks, may and also the receipts that are printed out may have chemicals that could have many of these properties. Raincoats and certain things that are water resistant have phthalates. Those receipts have something called bisphenol A or BPA. And so they're all around us, and so it's very difficult to separate ourselves from this. But the hair products are very intentional, and that's something that maybe if women had other options, and if they were labeled appropriately to say, hey, if you use this stuff, you could be putting your health at risk. What do you think? You think a better labeling is at least a good option?
Yes, I think more honest labeling. I think there should be more consistency. If the chemical is labeled hazardous on an item in Home Depot, and the same product and the same chemical is just labeled as risky in something that we put in our hair, it's not really being 100% truthful.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of disingenuity going on out there, and we're going to come to regulation and the responsibility of agencies like the EPA or the FDA and other government safety agencies that should be protecting us. But I can tell you one thing is that the use of these endocrine disrupting chemicals have been a focus of the World Health Organization, which believes that they are a key contributor to infertility in both men and women around the world. So globally, infertility impacts 186 million individuals, 48 million couples. And this is quite a bit. I mean, we know that genetics and lifestyle can contribute to decreased fecundity, which is another word for fertility. But have you noticed that there's a lot of fertility clinics and IVFs and women who need a surrogate because they can't have a baby, and so that is just not that's not normal. And so it's thought that the way that these chemicals that I listed a few minutes ago find their way into water supplies, they find their way into air, they find your way on the pesticides that may be part of the foods that we consume.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things have some bearing. Now, I want to go a little historical because there's a lady named Rachel Carson who was around during the 50s and the 60s. She wrote a very important book in 1962 known as Silent Springs. And I was totally trying to figure out why did she title this book Silent Springs?
That's a good question.
And so the answer came to me. She was an environmental reproductive toxicologist, and she was exploring nature and making measurements and discovering that we were using or overusing things like DDT, things that could be a cousin to Agent Orange. And when you take into consideration that pesticides or herbicides or insecticides or rodenticides are designed to kill living organisms, it never occurred to the scientists that it might be inadvertently killing us. And it may not be a quick death, it may be a slow death that may put us into harm's way. And because our endocrine system is so diverse, we've got a thyroid hormone, we've got testosterone, we've got estrogen, we've got adrenal glands that give us cortisol. We have other not as well known hormones that come from the heart or the lungs. But needless to say that we've got hormones that are chemical messengers all over our bodies, and many of these endocrine disruptors can disrupt any of a number of those hormonal systems. So Rachel Carson figured that if you use pesticides that could kill little bugs and little insects, or poisoning those little bugs and little insects, would the birds be able to make that discrimination before they went out for breakfast? Maybe not.
Yeah.
So birds apparently started eating bugs or eating fish that were contaminated, and guess what? They caused the disappearance of birds. The birds were dying. And so when you go out to spring, what's one of the typical ways that on a beautiful spring morning, if you're part of the Audubon Society or even just loving the sound of nature, what would not you be hearing?
Suddenly the bird chirpings are no more.
Exactly. And so that's where she got this title from. And Rachel Carson should be elevated because it was her that once again let us know that DDT could disrupt wildlife as well as human life. And ironically, she died of breast cancer. So as a result of her death and as a result of her testimonies in Congress, within years of her death, the EPA was formed, and other important agencies like the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences was born. So as a result of her, a lot of changes came where we really began to respect the environment and have things like Earth Day.
I had a quick question. Do you think, because obviously this was established after her book, do you think that it's coming from ignorance, or people just really don't want to deal with the repercussions of the stuff they're making and would rather deal with it later on, or not putting much thought into it in the first place? Because I think that is a very rational thought of, if this is affecting the plants, it's affecting the bugs, it's affecting the fish. I'm interested to know how someone else couldn't get there initially.
Well, when you start a chemical company and when you are engaged in a very strong money-making endeavor, which kind of spills over into the pharmaceutical world, but
Sure.
also textiles, the clothes that we wear. Many of the conveniences that we enjoy, we have to admit, may come through the chemical industry.
Mm.
But I would venture to say that a chemical company has a responsibility from the birth of that chemical process until the death of that item, that if you can't figure a way how those items could be used safely or recycled safely, then we don't really need it. We don't really want it. If it's going to devastate our ecology
Yeah.
and our environmental system, no thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if we don't know, then that's plenty indication to say that maybe we should stop there. Because if you don't know how it's going to play out in 30, 40 years, then maybe it's just not quite there.
Yeah, and later on, we're going to talk about the differences between how business is conducted in the European Union, because there are other philosophies. There are safer ways of handling very hot and questionable items. But unfortunately, money rules. Biblically, it states that the love of money is the root of all evil. But in the quest to make money, I think a lot of things are overlooked. And
Mhm.
that may be because of a short sightedness that we've got. Because if it doesn't kill you right away, so it reminds me of what the devil said potentially to Eve, you will not surely die. But what he was saying is that you're going to die. It's just going to be a slow death. Yeah. So another very important persons that affected this field of environmental toxicology were Professors Theo Colburn and Louis Gillette Jr. They were both actually professors at the University of Florida. Theo Colburn and some other authors, I think it was Demesky, wrote a book called Our Stolen Future. And in this book, she asks a very fundamental question. By using these types of products, such as these endocrine disrupting chemicals, are we threatening our fertility, our intelligence, and our survival by being exposed to them? And the strong insinuation and accusation were that these EDCs are injurious to the reproductive system and the neurodevelopmental capacity of both animals, humans, and capable of stunting our fertility. Now, we go back, we had a discussion already about the global infertility.
Mhm.
So now scientists are realizing that this class of chemicals can not only disrupt the fertility of little bugs, but they can disrupt the fertility of animals and potentially humans. And so that is a great reason why public health officials should be ringing alarm bells to try to get better regulation of this entire class of chemicals that pose a lot of risk. So, quick review is that these endocrine disrupting chemicals, they can be natural. There's some things in nature that happen naturally. However, the predominant source of them are what we would call anthropogenic. And that word anthropogenic simply means they're man-made.
Hmm.
So these chemicals can mimic, they can interfere or block hormonal signaling. And it's almost like getting to an intersection where someone has manipulated the traffic lights so you don't know if it's green, is it yellow, is it red. So you come to an intersection, you just don't know what to do. So these hormones, they sort of run a little rampant and havoc upon us. So it's traffic light confusing signaling. And this is a very difficult process for the body that is accustomed to its own. So some have likened these endocrine disrupting systems as sort of imposters, and the body can't distinguish between what's natural and what is man-made, and so they sneak into the system, cause this harm. So back to the notion that you had, maybe it's not intentionally done by these chemical companies. But as we begin to know better, what should we do?
I think we should do better.
Thank you, thank you. So I think the onus is now on these companies to do better, and the regulatory agencies need to do better as well. So many of these EDCs pose risk, and this could be plastic. So plastic bags, contact lens, and we're going to focus a little bit more on these personal and hair care products that are the focus of this study. So one of the things that we can now sort of move to is the fact that women may start to use products like chemical hair relaxers and straighteners during the adolescent years, when mothers begin to get the hair straightened. So let's get the hot comb, let's get the box of Dark and Lovely, let's get the well advertised products to get you, my dear darling daughter, to begin to look more like the Eurocentric accepted beauty standards that have been imposed. So Dr. Tamara Jones Todd, who I mentioned works now at Harvard in the field of environmental and reproductive endocrinology, but she does this from an epidemiologic focus. She has been researching racial disparities and environmental health, including exploring the role of black hair care products on the risks of women developing both uterine and breast cancer from products that contain environmental endocrine disrupting chemicals. Thoughts?
I'm hopeful. I'm looking forward to finding out what she has discovered.
Well, glad you asked, because Dr. James Todd used her platform to convince a lot of other scientists to begin to include questions about the use of hair relaxers, straighteners, and hair dyes to questionnaires of large longitudinal studies, such as the Sister Study. What is the Sister Study? It's a cohort of about 34,000 women that are being followed, and this has been going on for a few years now. And the Sister Study revealed that those women, a majority of whom were black, that regularly used products to chemically straighten their hair were 2.5 times as likely to develop uterine cancer as those who did not use those products.
Wow.
2.5 times.
That is not insignificant.
And there is now a class action lawsuit that is, I think it's in the Houston, Texas arena. They now have at least 1,000 women who have developed uterine cancer and or fibroids, and they definitely used these chemical straighteners and hair relaxers that we're talking about. Now, over the years, these products have evolved, so some of the ingredients that were in products maybe 50 years ago, such as lye, are no longer there, but the basis for some of the impact is still that they have hormonal impact. And can you imagine the shock when I found out that some of these products contain placenta?
Really?
Placenta, which is a tissue that allegedly protects baby from anything in mom, which we said is not really relevant. It's not as great of a filter. But the placenta still contains hormonal information and material like estrogens and or progesterone. And so some of the hair products that women are using actually has placental ingredients.
Wow.
And so can you imagine what impact this would have on children under the age of 10, or if the process of hair straightening starts at 11 or 12? And so no wonder there is this class action lawsuit. And
no wonder the endocrine system is so confused.
Yeah, absolutely. So research has calculated that the use of straighteners was linked to an elevated risk of uterine cancer. I won't go into the specifics of that, but that came out of this sister study. And I mentioned again about fibroids. How often will we find that in our community there are women that have had to have and endure fibroids, which can cause very painful menstrual cycles. They can have pain in their uterus that might necessitate a surgery that's known as a myomectomy, where they will take the small fibroids that are appropriately located, or they may have to take a large one. But this could impact the woman's fertility further, because she may not be able to then have a baby. So there's another study known as the Black Women's Health Study, and they use chemical relaxers. And once again, we said that black women use very high amounts. By the way, the beauty industry is a huge business. It's a $1 billion business, but black women, they use 9 times as much money to spend for certain beauty products.
Wow.
So they're very well invested. And so psychologically, I wonder if this actually suggests that as a group that they are either insecure or that they have this need to blend in. How important is it for women to feel like they fit in from a societal point of view?
It's extremely important, I mentioned before. But I have been seeing a movement lately of women embracing their natural hair, trying to embrace more of their natural curls, pushing natural beauty. And I think a lot of the younger generation is subscribing to that as well.
Yeah, I've been seeing, not to get personal with anyone, because we all have our health challenges and our health dreams and so on and so forth. But I noticed that a lot of women are now using weaves, which may involve glues and connecting. And I hope that does not prove to be problematic. I have suspicions that it may not be that safe, but anyway, there are some new options and alternatives. And there's a movement that I think is springing up known as the BIO, and that represents beauty from the inside out. And I hope that we can go back to recognizing and appreciating that we are among the beautiful flowers that exist in the botanical gardens of life.
From the older person's perspective, I would guess that they are resistant to change only because it can be daunting to do something new after you've been doing something for decades. You're kind of just stuck in the habit. You like to know how to do things, and it just comes easier than maybe updating how you've been doing your hair for 40 years, So I'm sure that plays a role.
Yeah. So back to this Black Women's Health Study. It so happened that I got a chance to talk to one of the leading authors on that paper, and the word came out that there was some equivocal findings. They didn't absolutely make the connection between the use of the relaxers, straighteners, and breast cancer as strong as was found with uterine cancer. So what we're now saying is that the information is not firm, but when the risk and the associations are there, shouldn't we employ some form of a precautionary principle? And yes, absolutely. I'm going to just jump right into that for a second and say that if scientists are looking at information, or chemical companies are looking at information that shows some sort of association, it may not be firm, but it's a strong enough association that maybe they should consider finding some alternatives, maybe finding some greener pastures, some greener products, instead of using things that have a history of problems. I negated to mention that Louis Gillette, a professor from University of Florida, came down to Central Florida, came down to Lake Apopka, found out that there had been a chemical spill and that alligators were now impacted in such a way that the phallus of the alligator, in other words, the penis of the alligators were shrinking, and the alligators were no longer able to procreate. That firmed up the whole notion of how these chemicals can impact the reproductive system.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, it affected the entire ecology of that Lake Apopka.
How quickly did they realize that the pollutants in the water, how quickly did they connect?
It probably took years, but it wasn't until someone decided to do what is known as biomonitoring and actually testing levels. Where you test the levels in the lake, and you may want to test the levels in other species and find out if there are any obvious changes. So when that sort of science has been done, and I sort of refer to environmental toxicological studies, they have found that certain animals that have been exposed to these kinds of chemicals behave as though they were gay.
Interesting.
And these animals were not created gay. And so as we look into the phenomena of transgenderism, or we look into the increase over the years of homosexuality, the question comes to my mind that if pregnant species, whether they be animals or humans, are exposed to these kinds of chemicals, what might be the impact on the sexual orientation? Because there is a point in our organogenesis, when our organs are developing, that they're critically hormonally sensitive. And we haven't really discussed this. We have rather pointed our fingers to those who look different, to those who have had a different phenotypical outcome than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're very quick to blame and accuse, and instead of asking,
And label unnatural.
Instead of trying to understand that there may be a scientific explanation that could be partially blamed upon poor regulation. And sometimes if you take out the finances of regulating, you would never know. There are certain political parties that don't want to finance regulation. And when we can't regulate the quality and the safety of water or of air or of food or of chemicals in products, I think that it is a landmark that we're ready to step into. And no wonder we are doing not so great. The United States was in a comparison with 10 other high-income countries, and they use various metrics to judge the efficacy, the longevity, the efficiency, and the health outcomes of the United States compared to other countries, and we actually came in last. Even though we probably spend the most, what?
We spend the most money on healthcare.
Thank you.
In the world.
Yeah. So I'm going to suggest that maybe we need to encourage the development of safer products so we can avoid this difficult environmental injustice of beauty.
Mm-hmm. Spend more money on the preventative as opposed to the cleanup.
Yes. So this environmental injustice of beauty is a conceptual framework linking intersectional systems of racism, sexism, classism to racialized beauty practices. And then we get unequal chemical exposures and adverse health outcomes. So this intersection involves these personal care products, skin lighteners, the hair straighteners, maybe even hair dyes, and even fragranced menstrual and intimate care products. There won't be any time to get into that right now, but we see once again the intersection of environment and social determinants of health. And I'm going to suffice to say that we're going to have to make some policy changes that our own protective bodies will do a better job at protecting the public. So at the very least, can we have enhanced ingredient disclosure? Can you just tell us what's in the product? Can we have some transparency where that is concerned, that these manufacturers are obligated to tell us what's in the product? That's a mandate. Number two, Can we do some more safety testing? Can that be a requirement that before you put a product out on the market that you test it rigorously to know that these cosmetics, which are under sort of grandfather rules and laws, and so they don't really test things as effectively. You can put something out on the market and allegedly it's safe, find out that it's not safe after it has done a lot of damage. The regulatory bodies have to have greater oversight, so we need to create the an independent regulatory body that could monitor and regulate these chemicals in beauty products. We need more research, so more monies need to be allocated to look at the health impacts of some of these beauty product ingredients. The public has got to be made more aware of the hazards of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, and we need some support for alternatives. And maybe lastly, some international standards that need to line up so that there's no discrepancies between one society and another. Well, I think we've come to the close of a very deep and interesting conversation about the cancer threats in beauty products. It was a lot to take in, and I hope that we each can reflect on behaviors and patterns that we have in the lives of our families, and maybe advise that we should not interfere with the use of chemicals that could subvert the health of our young ladies, which could lead perhaps to early diagnoses of cancers under age 40. That's where we started. Or to somehow mitigate and decrease the 40% mortality rate that all women of color are subjected to when they have that diagnosis. So with that, Camille, you have any final thoughts or comments as we close this out?
No, but I really enjoyed this topic, and I'm looking forward to following up on it later.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation and your insights. And once again, we want to say thank you to Central Florida and beyond for listening to this public service announcement that we want to not see women who are drop dead gorgeous. Thank you.